And now we're going to do a first turn kind of game summary of how to play the game in solo mode. I'm going to go through the first turn or two to provide you with a little insight on how this works. The solo mode is different than the two-player mode, but and I will point out the differences as I go through the turn. The first thing that you do in the two-player mode is you decide which side you want to take. Do you want to take the Normans or do you want to take the Saxons? And in the solo game, of course, the Saxons are going to be the player and the Normans are going to be the foe. The Normans will take the first player marker, and what the marker does is that it indicates who the first person is in the turn. And as soon as the Norman turn is over with, then the Saxon turn begins. The wedges are placed in the middle. They are placed 1, 2, 3. And the setup here, I have chosen to set up Harold opposite William, and they tend to cancel each other out in the wedge. So when it comes down to the final wedge battle, that's what can occur. Or you can put Harold here, or you can put him up here. Now in the two-player version, you would start the game with Harold and William in the front row. They would be in the front row at one of these wedges, set up and ready to play. But we're playing with the solo rules, so William sits back here. Now that we have that and we are set up and the objectives are ready, everything is ready, the cards have been shuffled, each side in a two-player game will draw 4 cards each, but for the solo mode only, the Saxon player will draw 4 cards. Now each player has a mulligan, which means that if you don't like the 4 cards, you can dispose of them once and then redraw, and then you're stuck with that draw. So if I decide that I, as a Saxon player, if I'm happy with what I've got, then I will keep it, and we will go into the first round. And in the first round, the first thing that occurs is a victory check. You know, is either side in a position of victory, and the answer here is no. And so for the second, we go to the second part of preparation, which is draw cards. And I don't have more than 6 cards, I only have 4, so I would draw 2 for the Saxon player. In a two-player game, both sides would draw up to 6 cards on the first round because they start with 4. And at the beginning of each subsequent turn, you would, if you have more than 6 cards, you would have to discard down to 6, and then you could draw 2. So you could theoretically have 8 cards maximum at the beginning of during the preparation phase when you draw the cards. And now you have all the cards ready, which means that they are untired or untapped, and we're ready to start the first turn. For the first turn, the Norman player does not draw. The draw deck remains with the Norman player, but there are no cards drawn. That's for the first turn only in the solo mode. So we go to the Saxon player, and I have 6 cards in my hand, so I look over my hand, and the first card I'm going to play is Ship Patrols. Ship Patrols is an event. It doesn't cost me any resources. The resources are located up here. It's 0, and I get to draw 2 cards, so that's cool. You always want to draw cards whenever you can. So I draw 2 cards. That's my action. It goes back to the Norman player. There's nothing the Norman player can do, so we go back to the Saxon player, and I have to decide which card I want to play, if any. And so I'm looking over my cards, and I've got lots of cards. I've got 7 cards in my hand, and what I want to do is slow down the Norman player and get rid of either one of these 2 cards, but preferably, that's a nice word, preferably. I'd like to get rid of this one because he has a resource which allows for a card to be played 1 higher than what is allowed in the rules for 1066. So it's a one-time thing, but I'd like to get rid of him because not only does he have the resource, but he also has Zeal. And that's not going to be important in this objective, but it will be important on the next one. So I'd like to get rid of this guy. And I do have a card that will do it, but I will have to, it costs 3, and I'm going to have to dispose of 3 cards. So I'm going to go ahead and dispose of 3 cards to get rid of this guy. And 2, and let's see, and 3. And I'm just going to play this fellow here. He is Waltheof, Earl of Huntingdon. I'm sure I destroyed his name, but hey, he can sue me on that one. When I play him, he causes 1 damage to a card in the wedge. I can choose any of these 3 cards. I will choose Eldred, and because Eldred only has a hit point value of 1, he is removed from the board. Goes back to the Norman player, can't draw, goes back to the Saxon player. What can I do? Well, I have 3 cards left in my hand, so I'm going to play, I'd like to play 1 card, and it costs 1, so I'm going to ditch a card for a resource. I'm going to play 1, and I'm going to play the Saxon Cyril here. And he isn't much, he only has 1 might, no zeal, 1 little hit point, but he has 1 resource that allows me to play when I tap or tire him. I can play a card 1 higher without having to dispose of a card. So he's played. We go back to the Norman player, nothing the Norman player can do. Back to the Saxon player, I decide to pass. So that's 2 passes, so the turn ends, or the deployment phase ends. We go to the wedge phase. We're not at, neither side is at Hastings yet. So then we go down to the objective phase. And did we meet the requirements for the objective? And the requirements for this objective is Halley's Comet, which is the very first one. Both sides automatically pass the objectives for Halley's Comet. So they are removed or discarded, and the first turn ends. And that's a demonstration of the first turn of 1066 in solo mode. So it's fairly simple, it's fairly straightforward, but it does get more interesting as the game progresses.